So I've got all three of my papers designed out. Some of them more complete than others, right? So, okay. The first thing I'm gonna concentrate on is the ink marking value composition. So what I want you to be focusing on here is using a pen and ink, right? So like, it could be a micron pen, it could be a Tombow pen, it can be any kind of a black pen, right? It could also be India ink with a really tiny brush. This one would definitely be too big, but like something you could actually maybe make stipples with, or small marks. So we're building up value with small marks, right? So what we're gonna do for the sort of process version of, or part of all this thing, we're gonna identify like 4 or 5 different values in this composition, and we are going to create broken line or stipple marks to represent those values rather than graphite, right? So like, I definitely, let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and, actually I think I'll use my Sharpie to make a value scale. And we'll move into, let's see, at least 4 different values here, right? So actually, probably be best if we expanded this. Now that I really look at my example, I've got a lot more value range in here than just 4 values. Ideally, we'd want to use 10, right? But to speed things along, we're going to be using 5. So out here, we're going to be treating this as either white or completely light, right? In my composition, I don't have a lot of white, and so I know that I can leave some white in certain areas, so I'm gonna treat this one more as a light value, and I'm gonna go all the way, since I have examples of this in like black areas, like here and back in here. I'm gonna make this completely black, and I'm not gonna wanna run out my pen doing that. So if you've got a Sharpie, right, you're demonstrating black or really, really close to black. The whole idea of pen and ink drawing is about the ratio of white space to black space and how we can manipulate that to create perceived values, right? So the way that these marks blend with the human eye makes it to where we can see grays in there. This pen is a little bit old with the newer one. We can see grays in there if we kind of unfocus our eyes to a degree, or move back from the values so that the binary aspect of the marking is not so evident. In other words, the white spaces blend in better with the black spaces to create a perception of gray. So in this space, I'm kind of going to use some cross hatching, some irregular hatching. Could use some scribble gesture types of marks. It's completely up to you in terms of how you want this to look. As a printmaker, I really like cross-hatching a lot for my shading, so we'll probably stick to that. I'm just trying to get this a little closer to this value here. Right now I have way too much white space. Breaking that up and systematically moving over and over. Turn my paper a little bit to kind of get better access. Now we're going to be doing this in 3 different media. So really, to simplify this experience, what we want to do is think of everything in terms of values, which is why I asked you to make a black and white image. It'll be easier to appropriate your media to that. Just gonna kind of keep breaking up this white area a little bit more. Again, it helps to unfocus your eyes as you're moving. I feel like that's a little bit lighter than my absolute darkest value. And I'm kind of thinking about like these areas with that darkest value, and then maybe, I don't know, some of these areas for that next darkest value. Maybe even in some of the areas of this kind of wheel form and the handle of this thing here. So I'm gonna shoot for more of a mid value here, a medium value. So I'm gonna be a lot more careful with my line work because the lines are gonna be more visible in this situation. You could kind of consider your mid value or your medium values or mid tones to represent an almost 50-50 mixture of black and white space in that value range. I may go a little darker than that just because I made my next value pretty dark. But really what you want to be doing is evaluating your image, your composition, and then deciding what values you need to practice before you get into that paper and that execution. What I generally start with, once I get to the execution of the black and white drawing with small marking, is I start light and I work to my darks, because we can always make a value darker in pen and ink, but we can never take that value out. So I feel like that looks a pretty good progression here. So now I'm gonna, again, lighten that up to a degree. I may break some of my lines up a little bit to allow a little bit more of that white to come through. If you're one of those artists that really likes to be clean about everything, you can use a ruler for this, absolutely. I'm just kind of using some broken line. I'll come across it in a few little areas just to add a little bit more value. Okay, feeling pretty good about that. And then I'm gonna go ahead and just make this one real light. And I'll do probably only exclusively broken lines. Kind of almost as a texture, but to fill the space and create that sense of value. Broken lines and stippling are probably the best way to work with those lighter values. Okay, so I've got my value scale here. What helps a lot of artists with this project is to number these, and then if you want to go in here and actually like create a code for this, almost like a coloring book kind of thing, you could. I'm not going to do that, but I will show you how that's done, right? So I've got a 1 through 5 step here. So what I might do, using a pencil, of course, because you do not want your numbers to really show up in here, is start to look for places that you would assign these types of values, right? So like, I'm gonna start with 5 because it's easiest, like 5, 5, 5, right? So I know that in this space 5, I'm gonna be using some 5s in here, right? I'll use some 5s in this location, drawing my numbers very well. This little hole in here is definitely going to be a 5, right? Then I could move into my 4s, kind of looking at where I think that next dark value is going to be, like maybe in this like little corner space. Maybe those are going to be 4s. Again, if you want to label this out, please feel free. I prefer not to, because I don't want to have to deal with taking it back off of the piece. However, with my 5s, I know I'll probably not see them because I'm going to be marking over them. So I'm actually going to pull this out, but I want you to know that if that's something that will help you, you certainly can do that. You can number these out so that as you're working, you can get a good feel for that. Okay, so now I'm going to move into application, right? Again, I find it's best to start with the lights and then move to the darks, because you can always darken things up. So I'm gonna focus primarily right now on these lighter values in here, the light values in this kind of blocky thing, some of this, what looks like a brush stroke, and then maybe up here, and a little bit of this, and then I'm gonna start to move on, right? So I'm gonna kind of evaluate the textural pattern that I see in here, looking at how this sort of has, I don't know if you can see that very well in the camera shot, but there's sort of a texture that cross contour works over the top of this, and I think that helps to add that volume, and so I'm gonna kind of work with that. Use more concentrated marking in the darker areas and much lighter marking to create form with the illusion of space or depth in this sort of abstraction. But I still want these rounded things to look rounded. I want to see some sculptural tendencies. Your shading basically needs to create form by manipulating value to create that. So, and if you'll note, I'm not outlining things, right? It's typically not a great idea to begin with outlines because you can't take them away later. But we can always add them if we need to later. So like I'm starting with my general shading first, which is kind of how I do everything. If you're in my drawing class, you know that. So it's pretty dark underneath this area here, so I know I can be a lot darker with that spot. So I'm just gonna kind of move in here and really get a lot more aggressive with that. That's a good spot to actually outline. If you feel like you need to modify things, do that before you begin with your media, right? So like if it doesn't look correct, do some drawing on there to change things up. Kind of deepen this spot here because it's pretty dark underneath. It kind of comes right up to that other contour, so I'm gonna I know it's going to be lighter right here, so I'm going to be kind of careful to make sure I don't go too dark. Kind of a shadow popping out from this space. What's nice about this one is an abstraction. You don't have to make it look like anything, right? You're just following the value patterns. So try not to think about this, being a representational work. It's more of an abstraction, which is the name of the project, right? Abstraction in 3 media. There ought to be a little volume in here, I feel like. Also, why we're working at such a small scale, because we are working with pretty tight types of shading. Could take a very long time if it were a larger scope project. Kind of following this shadow out here as I see that. Some people will go in here and sketch out first in pencil. If you want to do that, great, do that. And then work your pen over. I'm kind of using a scribble gesture in this area because it's a little smoother. I'm kind of looking at how maybe that Scribble gesture type of marking would help in those spots, but as I get out here, I have to lighten up quite a bit more. Got this sort of structure coming through here, so I'm going to kind of darken up the side of it, and then I'll start to merge that value with some lighter value. And I can always make that darker. Looks like maybe I need to expand the shadow. Kind of looking at this little contour in here, edge situation, I'm just going to kind of like stipple up to that, and then later if I need to deepen it, I will. Go ahead and push this really dark because I'm seeing kind of a triangular shadow happening in here, which sort of supports that little structure happening. So the rendering shouldn't be a challenge for you because you're transferring that information straight over to the Bristol paper. It's about how you use the media to create a good representation of your reference image. I'm getting a little too dark there, so I'm gonna lighten up. Just kind of started going, talking. So I'm gonna try to create, maybe keep this light, maybe get a little bit more shadowing in here. Definitely want to get some value on top of that, right? I've kind of neglected that to now. So I'm going to get some broken marks. Often it's a good idea to get back, kind of fuzz your eyes, compare the two, see how close you are. With these concentric rings happening here, I'm probably gonna have to map those out a little bit. So I'm gonna wait and then kind of work in there with my pencil. But for the sake of this demo, I'm gonna try to get everything around this little wheel thing going on. This texture is going to be interesting. I'll probably use a lot of stippling in that area. dark up to that point, so I'm gonna say, oh, that's about a good stopping point for that. Kind of a wedge type shape. It's a little scribble gesture, kind of clean that up later. Sharpie could work for this as well. I feel like that's adequate for now. I could go for hours and show you the entire thing, but you get the idea. You will be drawing this out in pen and ink, right, with repeated line. A lot of times choosing the correct line for that, but you're also going to be creating a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or however many values you feel like you see in here. You should have at least 4, right? Okay, cool.